Well, thank you all. It's lovely to see your faces in the room together, and welcome to the opening of the School of Communications 50th anniversary celebration of our rich history, which we'll speak about and share with you, and there'll be lots of time to share on this history. My name is Stuart Points, and I'm the director and professor in the School of Communication, and it's a tremendous honor to be the director at this time at a moment when we're able to really think about our past, our present, and our very promising future, which we'll also have time to talk about, I think. But before we get into that, as is custom, as is appropriate, it's my tremendous honor to welcome Morgan Guerin, Musqueam Elder, to the stage to help us honor and recognize the traditional lands on which this event and all events in Vancouver unfold. Morgan?
CMNS, dear friends and relatives, Enta Setzeleno. My name is Morgan Guerin. I'm a Musqueam Indigenous Elder in training. Not quite there yet. I'm very happy to be here to say a few words of welcome to start this beautiful series of learning. This protocol that we have of welcoming people to our shores is one that is as old as the land itself here. The Musqueam people have been welcoming people to these shores for many, many millennia. And it was in fact our warriors who would go out and meet newcomers and then meet them out on the water and say, do you come in peace, and what's your intention? Basically, are you going to get along with everybody, and what do you want to do over here? Because we have a responsibility to stewardship to the area. But guests in our home were always the greatest honor that could be had. In fact, if we look at the history of the Musqueam people in particular, on the other end of Granville Street, when you go through into the area that's now known as Marple, is a village called Cessnam. And Cessnam is older than the pyramids itself and is argued by many scholars to have been one of the largest trading ports in the world at one time, and was a center for very much what we've come to talk about today, communication. News of the world would come from all corners because of that trading that would happen all the way from Alaska, South America, straight across the area that my relatives know as Turtle Island, right across North America, would come to Cessna. So people would come to our tables and they'd tell us news of the world. And it is such a thing that I grew up with, that you learn that there's such a power in communication. There's such a power in words, that there has to have a rigor to it. There has to have strength. There has to have integrity, or they just become words. So these aren't campfire stories, but histories. In fact, in the Musqueam language, we have many different ways of saying it is known, it is said, or so says, and then the citing chain will go back to say who said it, or the sky is blue. We all know that, right? So this has continued on to this day, and I grew up with some beautiful elders who taught me it's not just the knowledge you have, but how you carry it, son, is just as important. Because if you don't carry it with these teachings and in a good way, these words will lose their power. They will lose their strength. So hearing that there's a whole school here to work on just that, to build strength and integrity, to understand it's more than not just telling a story, but how it's conveyed to others. And I think that's 50 years. Well, here's to another 50. So that said, I know we've got some speakers here today. Grandpa said, set the table, don't eat the table. So I'm very, very happy to say, on behalf of our Musqueam people, it was my 6th great-grandfather was Kaya Palano. And he was the one who welcomed the Europeans, the first Europeans to these shores. That was 1792. That's very late in the colonial game across Canada. And because of those communication webs, he knew exactly who he was talking to before he even saw their faces. which is one of the reasons when they started asking about metal and they happened to be Spanish, we kind of sent them on their way. So, no, you caused problems for our cousins down south. But that said, when he did, he met them, traded with them, and he said these words, "Meet sep quatquilum," and said, "You are all welcome." And he did. So it's my honor to, many years later, echo the same words, "Meet sep quatquilum." You are all very welcome here today. I want to honor my relatives from the Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh too. We are 3 nations that were divided by borders that we did not draw, but we have always been bound by our bloodlines. So our 3 nations have always looked after Mother Earth here. So on behalf of our people, welcome. Hait Sepka for being here today. I will have to leave shortly. We do have another family commitment, my little one in there. So please don't be offended when I do. But I hope the table's set for a good banquet of words today. Haichka.
To Morgan, we thank you for setting the table for the opening of our evening together and our celebration. We are very grateful for you and your daughter to be joining us on this auspicious occasion. I know that this is fit in within a busy schedule. We're honored for the ground you have set for us and for the welcome you have provided, and we thank you. It is my honor now to begin our ceremony and our celebration. This is an auspicious occasion for the School of Communication as we enter a period of celebration, a period of remembrance, a period of recognition of a remarkable tradition of critical scholarship, of teaching and engagement that have been absolutely central to our history, to our collaboration, to our friendship with each other. I am tremendously excited, as I mentioned earlier, to be with you today to help open up and to be the director of the school during this time. It's a remarkable honor. We have a tremendous opening program that we will share with you shortly and lay out. I want to remind everybody that beyond our opening talk by Dr. Paola Ricaurte, who we're so honored to have with us today, Adjoa Adimumi, who we're so honored to have as a respondent, and Dr. Catherine Riley, who I'm super grateful for her to moderate the session. And I will be passing the baton over to Catherine in a short little bit. I want to remind everybody, though, that in addition to our talk, we also have a reception immediately following, 15 minutes to your left out the door, food and drink, and so please come and share words with each other, break some bread together. It will be a lovely way to come near to the end of the second week of term and also to help honor the launch of this event. So as I say, and as we begin, there are many thanks that I will share at the end when, just before we turn to the reception. There are many people who have worked together over a number of months to bring together the celebration of the school's 50th anniversary. There are also a number of folks who couldn't be here with us this evening who wanted to share words of thanks and words of recognition, including the president, our president, University President Joy Johnson, and our dean, who is celebrating the birthday of one of his children tonight, and apologizes for not being able to be with us, but both have sent words that I am very happy to share with you. There are, as you will know, a number of events before us over the next 3 months that are part of our 50th anniversary celebration. And you'll see recognition of this in a slide coming up. Our next talk is on October 5th, and we look forward to seeing many of you there. There are other events that follow. But as we move to celebrate the school and our remarkable history of critical scholarship, it's my honor to offer an introduction to how we got here and where I think we're going in the kind of celebration that we have before us. So if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to share just some setting of the stage to follow on Morgan's very generous words of welcome that have helped to begin that process. And with that in mind, let me say that as part of thinking about the rich history of the school, we have set communication as critique as our overarching theme to capture what it is that are the through lines that have gathered us together over 50 years of work as researchers, as students and learners, as community-engaged scholars and students who have helped to shape the city around us, shape the field of communication, indeed shape the field of communication nationally and internationally. With that in mind, let me say, the present historical moment is set upon by a series of cultural, economic, environmental health, and political crises that have challenged our ability to care for each other and imagine a common democratic future. Many of these crises are not new, but are the result of the ongoing legacies of colonialism, imperialism, heteronormativity, patriarchy, racism, and capitalism that persist across societies. In this context, the critique of power and the terms and conditions of contemporary mediated life is more pressing than ever. Throughout our 50-year history, SFU's School of Communication has sustained a rich and vibrant tradition of critical communication research, teaching, and engagement that aims to make visible and disrupt structures of power while contributing to the coordination and development of progressive social change. This is something we can all be proud of, that we can all become part of, are part of indeed. Across this work, the process of critique has been taken up in a variety of ways to address the political economy, technologies, cultures, discourses, institutional and normative structures, and practices of communication that shape societies around the world. It's in the light of this history that we've taken up communication as critique as a central thematic guiding our celebration of the school's 50-year history. Critique, as we understand it, is disruptive, it is clarifying, it is liberating, it is hopeful, and absolutely essential for fortifying the kinds of collective, democratic, and diverse futures we are called upon to defend and struggle for today. Over the past decade or so, the school has been revitalized, as many of you will know, by the addition of a group of brilliant new faculty members who have brought renewed energy, diversity, and necessary change to our ranks. We continue to be inspired and sometimes led by our remarkable students, one of whom, Adjoa Ademwumi, you will meet this evening as part of Paola Ricaurte's talk. Some of the colleagues and friends who have helped to build our school over the past 50 years are no longer with us, while others have recently retired, leaving behind a legacy of enviable scholarship, teaching, and community that's helped to shape the field of communication in Canada and around the world. Over 50 years, our aims have often been to foment the kind of change that will make for a better world, especially for those who have long been excluded from the opportunities and possibilities of a just and equitable future. It's in the celebration of this rich and deep history that we've assembled a program of activities to mark our 50th anniversary over the fall. Across this celebration, we've aimed to focus on 4 distinct areas of critical scholarship and teaching that have been or are now hallmarks of our school. These include works in the area of global communication, intersectional research and teaching, the critique of technology, and work that aims to foster social justice. Tonight, we begin our celebration with a talk broadly in the field of global communication by Dr. Paola Ricaurte, who will speak on communication, power, and knowledge in automated societies. In a moment, I'm going to hand things off to Catherine Riley to set the stage, to introduce Paola, to set the stage for her talk. After Paola's talk, Catherine will return and will introduce Adjoa, who we've asked to offer an initial response to Paola's talk. And we're very grateful that she's agreed to do this. We recognize that this is not an easy thing to take on, and we're grateful for her willingness to take that on. Before I pass that on, though, I want to share with you some comments and remarks from the university president, Joy Johnson, who writes, "When SFU's School of Communication opened in 1973, we didn't know how drastically the way we communicate would change over the years. As the landscape has evolved, the school has evolved, with it to become one of Canada's leading communication programs, just as SFU has emerged as one of Canada's leading research universities." She goes on, "Thank you to the students, faculty, and staff who have contributed to the school's success through their research, community engagement, and contributions to discussions on today's critical issues, from the spread of misinformation to the role of communication in fighting the climate crisis. As our world keeps changing over the next 50 years, I can't wait to see the school continue to grow, innovate, and keep leading these important conversations." Joy will be with us on November 3rd to help open and celebrate our alumni event, also to be held here at Harbour Centre. We have a series of other talks. I also want to share with you the remarks of Dr. Carmen Neustetter, our Dean of the Faculty of Communication, Art, and Technology, who, as I mentioned, is celebrating one of his sons' birthday this evening. Quote, "The School of Communication has been a pillar of SFU for the past 50 years. I'm very proud to be celebrating 50 years of amazing accomplishments, including stellar faculty, staff, and students, and alumni. I see the impact the school makes at SFU and around the world on an everyday basis. They are leading the charge by responding to the most critical of society's needs and pressures." This could be not, sorry, I flew in from Australia last night after a 17-hour flight, so you'll excuse the fact that I'm a little bit fumbly-bumbly with some of my words. But it couldn't be more true that our school is at the absolute forefront of some of the most significant issues. Not only are we at the forefront, but some of our scholars and students are pushing the agenda and calling others to respond to these issues, to allow us to see our world, to act in our world, to make our world in more progressive and socially just ways. This is something that we will continue to return to throughout our celebration because it's something that is at the core of what makes us proud to belong to this school, to belong to it at a time where we build on the foundations of others who have helped this project of communication as critique to unfold and flourish. On that note, it's now my honor, and again I want to remark that I'll return afterwards to share thanks to a number of people who have been absolutely formative in shaping this event. At this point, though, it's my honor to pass the baton over to my colleague and friend, Dr. Catherine Riley. Dr. Catherine Riley is Associate Professor, FCAT Associate Dean of Research in the Faculty of Communication, Art, and Technology. She's part of the organizing committee that has helped to bring together the 50th anniversary celebrations. And Catherine will now help to moderate and lead us through the next section of our program. Catherine.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Good evening, everybody. It's an honor to be here, and it is really a pleasure to introduce my colleague and friend, Dr. Paola Ricaurte this evening. When I was asked to suggest possible speakers for our 50th anniversary celebrations, I thought immediately of Paola. Dr. Ricaurte joins us from the Instituto Tecnológico de Monterrey in Mexico, and she is an associate of the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. Together with Nick Coldry and Ulises Mejias, she co-founded Tierra Común, which is a global South network of activists, citizens, and scholars who reject data colonialism and want to imagine a future where the terrain of life fosters autonomy and connection. This network has looked at the environmental impact of cloud computing centers on global peripheries, the narration of datafication and AI in the majority world, data feminism, and in particular, the uptake of data by movements against feminicide, to name a few recent topics. Building on her background in languages and anthropology, Latin American post-colonial and communications theory, and a firm commitment to Marxism and feminist thought, Dr. Ricaurte has articulated a radical critique of dispossession through datafication, as well as an invocation to build community in response to technologically driven extractivism and dispossession. Both of these things animate the work of the Tierra Común network. I'd like to take a moment to explore how this work is relevant to us as a school, given both our history and our current preoccupations. First, Dr. Ricaurte's work offers a powerful alternative to continental theories of the surveillance society, which emphasize the liberation of controlled subjects. The central problem from a data extractivism point of view isn't to secure people's human right to privacy and authentic experience of freedom, as in the case of a surveillance frame, nor is it to address disinformation, which has long been central to the experience of colonialism, imperialism, and authoritarianism. Instead, the central problem is to reappropriate the data commons and achieve data sovereignty as a basis for the creation of a generative knowledge commons. Here, data is not treated simply as a material resource, the new oil, though this is absolutely part of the discussion. Rather, taking a page from José Martín Barbero, the commons can be idealized as the most democratic means possible to express the sensorium that organizes our human capacity for perception. Different patterns of technologically facilitated appropriation of the commons mediate how we perceive the world. And in this sense, big tech supplants the commons in ways that appropriate not just data, but also people's capacity to perceive the world creatively and independently. This brings me to the second point, which is that, importantly, in this view, the commons is not a library full of books or a database full of figures, but rather a space in which perceptive beings communicate with each other to manifest human and perhaps also non-human spaces of interaction. Drawing on the work of Walter Mignolo, if the goal is to move past colonial ruptures and overcome the original sin of European emulation, then the sensorium needs to be a human space of connection. And this requires a reanimation of ways of being, thinking, and especially doing that draw on a pluriverse of other ways of knowing, beyond those established by digital capitalism. These are human processes that restore the epistemic heart of the commons through moments of engagement, dialogue, creativity, and care. In Dr. Ricaurte's work, these moments are theorized as moments of radical care that work to, quote, rediscover the fundamental relational nature of existence, unquote. This is about imagining and enacting a mode of living that defends the value of creative and caring energies in the face of forces that seek to remediate or appropriate them. With this in mind, Dr. Ricaurte's work with indigenous and feminist communities in Mexico draws on innovation, design, art, and communications practices to sentipensar, that means think, feel, comunalidad, which means we-making, for the development of alternative technologies, alternative forms of technological appropriation, and indeed alternative worlds. So the School of Communication, in both its historical and current manifestations, operates in rich dialogue with Dr. Ricaurte's post-colonial theorization of datafication, and we have much to learn from her invitation to be optimistic, move past critique, or through critique, I should say, maybe, and work towards producing a world as we would like it to be. I look forward to hearing your words this evening, Paola, and learning from them. And with this, I would like to invite you all to join me in welcoming Dr. Paola Ricaurte to the CMNS 50th anniversary celebration.
So, well, before I start, I have to warn you that I don't speak English very well, so I will blame the AI for any mistakes. And also, my body hasn't figured out that we are in Vancouver, and I woke up at 3 a.m. Thank you very much, Dr. Points. Thank you very much, Catherine, for your generous, amazing words. And I feel really honored and humbled for this invitation. I do really believe in the power of communication as a transformative power for social change. Thank you also to the people of the team of the School of Communication, Joanna, and all the communication teams who have worked so hard to make this possible. Also to Adjoa for your generosity in joining us today in this conversation. I also believe in the power of bodies sharing the same space as a transformative energy, even though it remains a challenge after the pandemic. That's why it's a great privilege for me to stand here before you today in this territory that we honor, for welcoming us and for allowing us to meet. I believe in territories and bodies as sacred spaces. Today, I have chosen to speak about what I think is fundamental in order to make sense of what we are living as humanity. To think in how there is an assemblage of economic systems, communication systems, knowledge production systems, and socio-technical systems, as those that configure today what Bernard Stiegler called the automatic society. A society that today requires our response from those of us who work on the communication field and think that this is a fundamental space for social transformation. So I will begin by talking about the ontological and epistemic ruptures as ruptures in the possibility of connecting to each other. Then I will speak about coloniality and decoloniality. And after that, about the processes of dispossession related to the body and the territory. And finally, I will talk about the technologies of radical care. Today, I won't speak about ChatGPT, only if you want. And I won't speak much about datafication. However, I will consider, of course, processes of datafication and as processes of dispossession. So, yeah, so this is the structure. I also would like to say that I speak from a decolonial framework, and I will speak more about this, from a feminist standpoint, and also from the territories of Abya Yala, the way that indigenous movements in the territory that some people call Latin America and the Caribbean prefer to call the land in which they inhabit. And Abya Yala in the Kuna language means land in its full maturity, or the flourished land. So we prefer to take this word to call, to speak about our territories because it's more related to what we think about ourselves. And also, part of the things that I will be speaking with you today are collected in these publications and projects. They are all in Spanish, but we will use ChatGPT to translate them. So this is Abya Yala, and I tried to find a map with like Vancouver. And I come from Mexico, but originally I come from exactly this point, just for you to know. I am an immigrant in Mexico, a land that has given me everything what I have. So I'm very grateful for that too. So the first part is about communication, power, and knowledge. And I sound very Foucauldian here, but But it's not all about Foucault, I promise. So communication in etymological terms means sharing. And communication is a fundamental process for the survival of beings. It's not exclusively a human quality. If we pay attention, we can see that the complex forms of communication in the biosphere are astonishing. From the systems of mycelial networks that allows the bioreparation of the planet, to the purr of a cat that communicates that it feels comfortable when we pet it. Living things communicate to survive. And yet, in the human species, we are deeply fracturing the ability to communicate as a condition of survival. And yet, I believe that this fracture is due to a deeper fracture, a rupture in the understanding that life, existence, is only possible in relation. Arturo Escobar, Colombian anthropologist, calls this relational ontology. And it's a way of naming a principle rooted in the onto-epistemology of many peoples of the territory that we call Abya-Yala, as well as in many territories of other latitudes. A relational ontology conceives of connection as a constitutive element of being. So these are mycelial networks. If you haven't heard about mycelium, it's a fantastic representation of what life means. So it's actually fascinating. And these are, of course, my cats. We have thought in Western and Westernized society that the evolution of a species is a result of the survival of the strongest. And we have been taught that this strength is thought of as a quality of a species, as if the possibility of survival were achieved independently of others. This idea is rooted in many social imaginaries and has served to construct narratives in which we can survive alone. It is also a narrative in which human beings think of ourselves as superior to what surrounds us, to other beings. And this separation, this rupture, allows for the possibility of conceiving of ourselves as individual entities. But in fact, the strength of a species and its individual lies in their ability to organize and transform themselves based on the conditions of their environment and their relationship with other species. In order to exist, we need to adapt. We need to be resilient. But that means learning to recognize that our lives depend on it. We need others. Survival requires the knowledge of life in relationship, of our capacity to affect and influence each other, to understand that everything we do has an effect on something or someone. And today, that understanding is broken. The understanding of interconnectedness as a condition of existence is broken. So this is the ontological rupture, the rupture of the understanding of being in relation. This ontological rupture is at the same time an epistemic rupture, a rupture that puts in check the understanding of reality, of truth, of authority systems. We are asking ourselves today, what does it mean to be a human being? For example, what's reality? What's alterity? What's the truth? These ontological and epistemic ruptures have been built in a savage, persistent way for centuries as part of the pillars of society since before the colony, against women, as Silvia Federici shows in her work, and of course since the colonial invasion against all people who were not the invaders. The colony initiated, together with the occupation of territories, an order of classification of beings based on their racial difference, a form of social and epistemic superiority which allowed the legitimation of violence and dispossession. For some Latin American authors, such as Enrique Dussel or Bolívar Echeverría, this racial epistemic difference served as the basis for capitalist accumulation and the beginning of modernity. Cedric Robinson calls it racial capitalism. At this point, for me, it's important that we understand that violence, of course, is not just emerging, but it's the result of this ontological rupture. And of course, has a consequence on epistemic systems as well. So this epistemic and ontological rupture create hegemonic visions of the world. These hegemonic visions that define which knowledge is valid, which bodies are valid, which institutions are legitimate, which languages should we speak, which technology should we use, and how we have to define our relationships to each other. Under the decolonial framework, there are two conditions that we understand as part of this ontological and epistemic rupture. And this is the framework that has been used and developed by many scholars in Latin America, but we think that the decolonial program began with the colony, with people resisting against colonization. So this is a way to name that struggle. For Quijano, coloniality, or the coloniality of power, means the daily control of work, resources, products, the body, the gender sexuality system, authorities, institutions, violence, subjectivity and intersubjectivity, knowledge and communication. And for me, this coloniality of power in automated societies is it's embodied, is materialized through socio-technical systems as the epistemic and material appropriation of body territories and the erasure and extermination of alternative ways of being, knowing, and feeling. So that's why we say that we need to embrace a decolonial program, a decolonial praxis, to dismantle all these systems of violence. So decolonization for Jairo Funes is a geopolitical project seeking to dismantle material and symbolic structures of domination and exploitation. So the most important thing about decolonization, or more precisely, decoloniality, is that it's not a theoretical framework, it's a political praxis. So when we speak about decoloniality, now that it's been a framework that is being used by many scholars, we speak not about using theory, we speak about changing how institutions, practices, and relationships reproduce the matrix of power and reinforce mechanisms of oppression. So in this moment, this historical moment, we have been listening a lot about, for example, some technologies are posing an existential risk to us as humanity. But first, I would like to begin questioning these ideas, these narratives, because for the majority world regions, we are not interested in these narratives about technologies that are extractive, that are corporate, that are based in values that do not respect the commons. The technologies that we have today, hegemonic technologies, are driven by corporate interest and are part of the economic intervention agendas of the countries that control these technologies and are now affecting specific bodies and territories. So, as I was mentioning, violence comes from this ontological rupture that separates us as human beings from other human beings, but also from the environment. And when we speak about these systems of violence, we recognize that this violence is used, of course, as a way to extract and dispossess these bodies and these territories and appropriate those resources, those shared knowledges, those shared territories, for not for the common good, but for private interests. So earlier it was mentioned like the different systems of violence that are operating in our societies, and of course we can name like the basic systems of violence: capitalism, colonialism, the patriarchal order, ableism, and others, that in sum conform this matrix of power. And under the decolonial framework, this matrix of power, as I was mentioning before, is trying to understand how these assemblages of different components, institutions, cultural practices, the production of subjectivities, the control of labor, the control of bodies, the control of resources, natural resources, but also intangible resources, conform the control of, at the end, of every form of being, knowing, and feeling. So with this system or matrix of domination or matrix of power, violence is naturalized and institutionalized through different institutions, through different systems, norms, and practices. So among these forms of violence, we can find epistemic violence as a fundamental mechanism to reproduce this matrix of domination, but also dispossession. Because epistemic violence legitimates and habilitates other forms of violence. So we're speaking about biophysical violence, cognitive affective violence, epistemic and cultural violence, social-political violence, legal, regulatory violence, economic, socio-technical, environmental violence. In Spanish, we use violence in plural because we think that violence is multidimensional, that violence takes many forms. And when we speak about this matrix of power under the decolonial framework, we are speaking about precisely how these knowledge systems are articulated with these economic systems, with socio-technical systems, and also with communication systems. And together, these systems contribute to create these systems of authority. As I was mentioning before, these orders of classification, these systems of knowledge creation. But these systems require not only the articulation of these components, but also they require infrastructures. They require buildings, they require cables, they require data centers. So infrastructures are part of these assemblages of knowledge production. But also these assemblages of knowledge production have a place in the production of subjectivities because they institutionalize the ways in which we understand ourselves, they mediate the way that we relate to each other, and also the way in which we understand reality. So the mediation of these assemblages of knowledge production articulated with socio-technical assemblages and communication systems, in sum, define also how we relate with ourselves. But under these interlocked systems of violence, all these systems work to legitimize this possession and the appropriation of the commons. So margins and peripheries are precisely the locus of this dispossession and appropriation. Margins and peripheries are bodies and territories subject to extractivism, dispossession, and violence. So I use the category of the body territory as fundamental to understanding the way dispossession works. The body territory is a category developed by Lorena Capnal, an indigenous Mayan from Guatemala, that has helped me to understand how destructive processes of dispossession and violence expand in the era of the automatic society. Today that we are experiencing that the imperial nations that concentrated power and wealth through these historical processes of dispossession and violence continue through war, technology, institutions, communications, knowledge production, and culture to reproduce this order of epistemic and racial violence, impoverishing as well and as imposing an order of being, knowing, and feeling, as the Peruvian sociologist Aníbal Quijano put it, that are important conditions for domination. So that has been the history of Abya Yala, with impoverished societies despite their natural social and cultural wealth. That is the colonial history of many peoples of the majority world. So the understanding of territory, the body territory as a continuum, also challenges the idea that we in Western societies or Westernized societies have about the territory. We usually think of the territory as, for example, the soil or the land, but we don't think of territories as the sacred space where the communities are built, a relational space. So territories are a relational space that allow the bodies, these communities, to exist. So this is an image, a representation of the Ayuk territory. Ayuk is a community in Mexico, Oaxaca. So Lilia Perez, an activist, an Ayuk activist and also radicalist, explains that, for example, for them, the territory is a continuum in which the soil and the all of, how do you say, subsuelo? Like, what's big?
The underground.
The underground. And the air, everything is connected. It's part of the same sacred territory. So for them to open their community radio, they had first to go to the mountains and ask for permission from the gods, because it's a shared space, it's a common space. But the Mexican state asked them to pay money to open their community radio, and also to file a lot of documents to ask permission to occupy the spectrum. So Lilia was sharing with us that they didn't understand why they had to ask permission to occupy their territory that is sacred. So these are part of the discussions and the ways that we need to begin challenging the idea of the territory just as a space that we can occupy. Territory is a space in which communities can survive. So this is an image of this idea of the connection between the body and the territory coming from a collective called Iconoclasistas. And in this case, they are trying to represent how the territory of Abya Yala has been long a space of extractivism, and that extractivism causes an impact, a negative impact in the bodies of the communities in terms of health, and also, in terms of their well-being. So these are the impacts in the bodies of the people that are affected by destructive industries. So this organization of indigenous peoples in Mexico They say that the extractivist violence and dispossession that plague indigenous peoples and communities begin with their bodies and are taken as someone else's property, controlled, beaten, mutilated, cursed, and murdered. People in Abya Yala, especially land defenders, are being killed everywhere. Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil are the countries in which land defenders have the most risk. So the extractive reason is the logic of dispossession imposed as a model of human interaction with one another and with the ecosphere. So I say that in our current automatic societies, epistemic violence manifests as an epistemic processing composed of these three processes: datafication, algorithmization, automation. Datafication as the conversion or the transformation of our life and our environment into data. The mediation of algorithms to understand, to make sense of this data, and also automation as a process in which the state and corporation try to make decisions about our societies, considering this algorithmization and datafication. So these processes are epistemic processes that are socio-technically mediated and reinforce global orders of classification that lead to epistemic, racial, gender, economic, social, cultural, and environmental justice. So there are many consequences of these processes because we are not speaking only about the material cost of socio-technical development, but also the cost for communities that inhabit those territories that are extracted to obtain the natural resources necessary for developing technologies. So we are witnessing all these processes. And the problem is who bears the cost. And usually the cost goes for the communities that are defending the land. So this is a quotation from Yasnaya Aguilar. She is a Mije activist linguist and a person who has been speaking about the ways in which the Mexican state exterminates indigenous peoples in Mexico. So in this quotation, Yasnaya speaks about this myth of socio-technical development as a myth that is not sustainable, a myth that is leading us to what Moira Millán calls a terricide. So the movements for the defense of the territory and the ancestral struggles of native peoples in Abya Yala provide us with many clues to understand resistance and also to imagine alternative technological future. Yasnaya Aguilar calls them techiologies. And I would like to explain what techiologies mean. In Mexico, in Nahuatl, tequio is a practice, an ancestral practice to achieve a goal, a common goal. And this practice has an equivalent in different peoples in Abya Yala. For example, in Andean cultures, it's called minga. We are called for mingas when we need to solve problems, when we need to build roads or build a house. And also in Brazil has an equivalent that is mutirao. So Yasnaya says that techiologies or technologies should be considered as techios, as technological creations and innovations that are for the common good. A kind of open source software we can all participate in, just as we have participated in the construction of our lives as the colonized people of this continent resisting genocide and extinction In the face of our current global climate emergency, we need to foster forms of technological development that emphasize living with dignity, not infinite economic growth as an end in itself. We must focus on technologies based on collaborative labor more than on competition. As peoples of Abya Yala, we're experienced in this strategy, which I call techiology. If the world were to listen to the people of Abya Yala and adopt this new technological vision, we could perhaps escape the digestive system that so threatens our worst climate and endangers human life. So these are the words of Yasnaya. So these technologies, of course, promote autonomy, self-determination, sovereignty, communality, pluriversality, sustainability. We still don't have technologies that are sustainable, not digital technologies that are sustainable. We have other technologies that are sustainable. So we have a shared responsibility to defend the possibility of a dignified future for all. We need to resist, or as the Colombian artist Adolfo Alban says, we need to re-exist. Fostering technologies and relationships of radical care, reparation, reconnection, rewriting our histories, recovering our environment, our bodies, territories, our affections, our sensibilities, transform our institutions, transform our forms of organization. Try to build infrastructures that are infrastructure for all. Try to transform knowledge systems that are exclusionary. Work towards fair labor conditions. Intersubjective relations that are relations of care, new imaginaries, new narratives. Keep our memories, decolonize our desire, as Sueli Rolnik says, and of course, imagine our new future in common. We have to repair the relational nature of existence to be able to imagine alternative futures that allow for being, thinking, feeling, doing, and living together. Resistance is always possible and is taking place today and historically. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Paola. That was really fantastic. So we have now a response from Adjoa Akumumi. And I'm just going to provide a brief introduction to Adjoa, who's a very impressive person. Adjoa is, of course, a PhD candidate in our school, which alone makes her a very impressive person. But she's also a Mellon Data Fluency Fellow, and her research focuses on emergency AI technologies in Africa and their entanglement with longer histories of risk, race, surveillance, and power on that continent. She's also a founder, this isn't an also, she is a founding member and inaugural secretary of SFU's Black Caucus, contributing to the drafting and implementation of the Scarborough Charter, Canada's first national charter on anti-Black racism and Black inclusion in higher education. And Adjoa also holds an MA in communication from SFU and an MSc in conflict and development studies from the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS, at the University of London. So, Adjoa, I'm really looking forward to your thoughts.
Okay, hi everyone. Paola, I have met you like 3 times in the space of 1 week. And I would say it has been such a pleasure to share space with you. And at the risk of sounding like a fangirl, I know I said this, I have to reiterate something I say every time I meet you, which is like, thank you for the important work that you're doing, centering the majority world, global south, in these very important conversations about AI ethics, data colonization, coloniality of technology, because we know like most times when these grand narratives of AI ethics are being constructed, most of the time these spaces are left out. So like, thank you so much for emphasizing and recentering them in the conversation. As someone who is from the majority world, the global south, and also studies that context, I know it's very important to think about the transposition of these technologies into these spaces. Not even about like how they work, but as you mentioned, like how they work to reorder power, but further entrench them into these global systems of capitalism, patriarchy, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very inspiring to hear your work. And something, again, that I find very inspiring is your emphasis on epistemology. I feel like a lot of the work that we've been doing about technology really looks at like the sociopolitical, socio-technical, but your perspective of decoloniality, sorry, like English always trips me, really like recenters that conversation about the epistemological and the epistemic violence that comes with these technologies. I don't really have a response, but I have questions. But I will try not to monopolize you because I know like the audience also have questions too as well. And as I was like reading up your work and getting ready for this, it reminded me of something I think it was Yuqui that mentioned that the problem of technology is a metaphysical problem, right? And I think it's very inspirational for me as a young scholar watching as the field of STS, data studies, is sort of like posturing or turning to BIPOC scholars, BIPOC knowledge, and rethinking the relationship between technology and epistemology. So in Canada, for example, we have Jason Lewis looking at AI from indigenous epistemological perspectives. So like, what does it mean to think of AI as kin? We have people like Beth Coleman, who draws a lot from like Black studies, Sylvia Wynter, Fred Moten, to think about what does it mean to think of AI as wild, but thinking more so about AI that can exist outside our own oppressive systems. So it's been very, very, very heartening. And after our first Zoom talk, I went and I looked at your work, and I noticed that in almost every paper, you tell a story about decolonization of Mexican women, and I think that's really good in the sense that decolonization as a practice, as a process, that's something that's happening. You make sure to sort of like emphasize what is going on and sort of like transform these spaces as spaces that we can sort of like turn to learn from, as opposed to that narrative of spaces that are in need of our intervention, right? So here comes the questions now. And my questions for you are a bit selfish, and it's stemming from some of the things that we are doing. Some of us, I see a few people here from the DDI lab, some of the things that we're trying to like think through together, and we're calling it playing with math, but basically we're trying to say like, can we rethink AI at the level of mathematics? And the reason we're trying to do this, that you highlighted, is because if we think about AI and these technologies in relation to epistemology, in relation to like in relation to metaphysics, and we begin to unpack the different layers there, we begin to see like how it's like an assemblage that requires specific forms of knowledge, specific forms of logic to operate, right? So how does automation work as automation? How does datafication work as datafication? So if we think from even like the math of probability, and probability as hacking would say metaphysical, in the sense that it's a conceptualization of people's idea of uncertainty, or we think about quantification, and someone like Porter would say quantification is a technology of distance that erases local and nuance, and it standardizes, and I can go on, we can think about classification like you mentioned, but my question really is, how do we sort of like, within all these layers, we think about the life cycle of AI. I know you talk about that in your other works. And we think about, because this is only at the level of design. And we're already thinking about so many forms of logics that sort of like reorder or embed ideas of relationality between like how humans relate to each other, who is human, and or how we relate to the world. And this is just at the level of design. So if we're thinking about decolonizing AI, like how do we sort of like relates to that experience of those different levels? And I have another question. Again, I promise I'm not trying to monopolize you, but it sort of like flows into each other. And the other question I was thinking, because you mentioned the radio, and that made me think a lot of Fanon, who I'm also a fangirl of. And Fanon says something about the radio. So Fanon talks about the radio in Algeria, and he says that the radio is a material representation of colonial configuration, right? And he's saying because of like the way the French use it. And so Fanon, a post-colonial scholar, and I know you make that difference between decolonial and post-colonial, but again, like you would know, there's no congruence in terms of what's post-colonial. There's a lot of like overlap between Fanon and Quijano, Mignolo, and things like that. But it's interesting because like Fanon says there's a flip that happens, like in Fanon's Die in Colonialism, whereby the radio moves from this tool of coloniality or coloniality to a tool of liberation when the Algerians co-opt the radio, and it becomes something useful for their self-determination. So, but I'm thinking about like your own vision of like anti-colonial AI, because obviously the radio is not as complex, doesn't have that same complexity of AI. And I'm wondering, like, and that's the second question, like, given the complexity of AI, given its relationship to epistemology and ontological rupture that you so carefully outlined, can there be anti-colonial AI? What would that look like in terms like, is that switch like Fanon highlights in terms of once you co-opt it? But again, how do you co-opt AI, thinking about who benefits from datafication, thinking about its relationship to the earth and the way like Kate Crawford outlines the way it damages the earth and things like that. Like, can there ever be anti-colonial AI, or should we just like throw everything away and, and forget about it? Yeah, I said many questions.
Well, I would begin with the last question, because one of my projects is called Incubating Feminist AI, and the first question that people ask me is that one: Can it be like a feminist AI? Can it be a decolonial AI at all? And for me, going back to my previous idea of relational ontologies, I do not like to think of technology as an object or a device or something. Technologies, as we say in our hack feminist spaces, technologies are relational devices. And when I think about technologies, I prefer to, instead of speaking about technologies, I prefer to speak about socio-technical assemblages, or in particular, when we speak about AI, I prefer to speak about algorithmic assemblages. Because one of the problems when we only focus on that technology is that we miss the bigger picture, as I was mentioning. We need to think about institutions that use these technologies. We need to think about the knowledge production systems that are behind these technologies. We need to think about economic structures. We need to think about cultural processes. We need to think about social relations. So if we want to develop decolonial or feminist AI, we basically need to change the matrix of power. Who controls the technology? Who owns the technology? Who bears the cost of that technological development? How those technologies are built? For what? And if we don't understand that there is a whole system of nowhere power relations that are taking place to develop the technologies that we are using as hegemonic technologies, and that decided that these were the technologies that we should use or desire as the technologies of our societies, then we will miss the picture about what does it mean to really create the technologies that we need and the technologies that will help us, our communities, to achieve a dignified life. So in our project, we are fostering the development of AIs that are oriented toward social justice. We have multidisciplinary teams led by women in the Global South, teams that are working with communities that are trying to see if they really want a technology or not. So that's, for me, like the feminist part, because we are trying to challenge the way technologies are built. Probably we'll still need to use, like, I don't know, the data center of someone somewhere But we are trying to cover the layers that are like being able to be transformed by our actions. And then we have, of course, another layer that we are trying to push technological policies that are fostering different type of technologies in our countries, in our region. We are trying to work in different levels.
Thank you so much for that, because I feel like you're absolutely right. I think there is a problem we have about thinking about the inevitability of technology, in the sense that if someone else is not developing, I'm going to develop it. So we just keep on moving towards this path. And I think you're absolutely right about thinking about whether we need these tools at all. And it's making me think of like some scholars who even like contradicts like the idea of predictive technology. Like, what does it serve to do? Like, why do we need this technology? I think you're absolutely right about like that critique of like thinking about like, do we need this thing? Because we can create it doesn't mean that we need it to exist. So I'm just gonna end it there.
So we have time for a couple of questions from the audience. So we have a question in the middle here.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. I really enjoyed it. My question is about the mycelium networks that you brought up early in the talk. And that caught my attention because there's a lot of excitement around fungus and fungal networks right now. Like there's all the Netflix documentaries, there's talk about psychedelics and revisiting what these can do for our health. But what I thought was kind of interesting is that fungi are notably not animals. They're from a different kingdom. And so like they're as far from human as we can kind of get. And so in like a post-humanist sense, what lessons can we take from them and from their mode of communication that sort of escapes or outpaces capitalism, colonialism, or patriarchy? Because it seems to me like the internet is sort of this decentralized network that immediately comes to mind, but it might also be a red herring where it's like, is more ubiquity of internet and Internet of Things really the answer? Is that what we're supposed to take from all this excitement? It seems like probably not. So like, what's the vision for somebody who's like knows enough to know that fungus are exciting, but hasn't read Anna Singh's Mushroom at the End of the World yet? It's been on my reading list for too long. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that question. I think that our history has been really anthropocentric, and we need to listen more to nature, to learn, because nature has the power to repair itself. We haven't like understood that enough, I think. And mycelium is, for me, is an amazing example of how to think of technologies as reparative, technologies that take what is toxic and transform it into something that allows life. So what I think is that the technologies that we are building right now are technologies of war, are technology. Using Achilles' Membe idea of necropolitics, I said these are necrotechnopolitics that we are supporting instead of supporting technologies of life, technologies that allow our existence as humanities, as humanity. As humans, but humans not as the center, but humans as part of the ecosystems or the ecosphere, let's say. So I think that we need to look closer to the rhythms of nature and the processes of nature, and I would love to have, an internet of fungi.
Hi, thank you so much. I want to go back to the point about seeing technology not as a thing, but as whether we want to call it embedded in relations or the product of many complex relations. and encourage you to talk more about how you've done that or how you're trying to do that. And the backdrop of that is I'm a faculty member here in the school nearing retirement and have spent much of my career trying to embed myself in and interrupt those relations that produce technologies as a way of redesigning, if you like, or reappropriating technologies. And what I'm incredibly struck by is how challenging that is. So I'm always really interested in hearing about how people go about that and what you in particular would say to a room full of young people that might be really captivated by that idea, but not really know what that means they should do. So can you speak to that? Thank you.
Catherine mentioned that I'm an optimist, and I am an optimist because fortunately I have the chance to see many people, not only in Latin America but in the world, that are trying to build and sustain those technologies that I call technologies of radical care. So these are technologies that are probably not shiny, or technologies that are not really, maybe not that easy to use, but are sustained by communities. And for example, there is a community called May 1st Technologies. They are based in the US and in Mexico, and they support community infrastructures for organizations around the world. And these technologies are sustained with community values. Their labor relations are like really horizontal. It's an example of an organization that is supporting technologies, infrastructures that are not market-oriented. But this is one example. There are many, many examples. In Mexico, there is a group of communities, indigenous communities in Oaxaca, that build their own mobile cell phone networks. And they are also maintaining those networks. It's a very hard work. It's not easy, of course, and they are competing with the traditional corporate telecommunication service providers. But that is a really interesting example of how communities, organized communities in Mexico, have fought against the Mexican state because, again, the Mexican state treated them as like regular services, so they were trying to make them pay like an immense amount of money that they, of course, didn't have. So they had to sue the state in order to exist. But again, this is another example. And then, for example, in Argentina, there is a federation of technologies, of cooperative technologies. So there are many, many initiatives that are associated as a federation, and they develop different technologies, including AI. It's the only cooperative, the only AI cooperative that I know of in Latin America. But of course, there are other cooperatives that are also affiliated in that federation. So there are many, many initiatives. There is another initiative in New Zealand, which is fantastic. A Maori community in New Zealand developed their own natural language processing model in Maori, using, of course, their own data, and they define it like they designed the license that people should use if they want to use the system and the model. They define it everything, like the model of governance of the technology. So that's another example. But there are many. The problem is that these examples are not, let's say, popular because they're challenging the basic business model of hegemonic technologies. But there are many examples around the world. So I think that's fascinating. And that's why I'm really optimistic, because we usually think that there is only one way to develop technologies, and there are only certain technologies that we can build. But actually, in history, and the history of computing and the history of technology, there have been many, many examples of an alternative. But the problem is that, for example, the US, in the case of Latin America, has intervened to block those technologies. There was a very known case in Chile in which the president Salvador Allende developed a system that was sovereign. And it was very interesting because it was a different way to understand automation in state, not regulated by the market. But that, of course, you know the story. But it's not the only case in history. There have been many, many cases. So there is hope.
All right, so I want to just so much thank you, Paola, for this presentation. We're going to have more time to chat with Paola during the gathering afterwards. So if you have additional questions you want to ask, please, she's very friendly. She doesn't bite at all. Please come and chat with her. And I want to thank you, especially Paola, for giving us this conversation about hope that brings together communication with the idea of recreating the world differently. I know that Stuart introduced this 50th anniversary celebration as communication as critique, and that is really important work, but we have to move through critique to something. And that is something that we are incredibly well positioned to do in this faculty. We are the School of Communication, and we are not just studying communication, but hopefully are communicators who are communicating the world into being through our actions. But we're also alongside colleagues in the School of Contemporary Arts, and in the School of Interactive Arts and Technology, and in the School of Publishing, and in the Center for Digital Media, all of which are spaces where people are making things and are creating things. And so as you start the school year, or perhaps as you start your MA or your PhD, I really want to invite you to take these ideas to heart and think about, what can I do with my time here, not just to learn about other people's activities or critique, but also to mobilize your knowledge to do things in the world, to produce the world that you want to live in.
I want to join with Catherine in thanking Paola and Adjoa for a really wonderful talk. And amongst reasons I want to extend this thanks is because you've marked a number of threads that have long been part of the School of Communications history of critical engagement and critical scholarship. In particular, the whole context of efforts to mobilize alternative forms of media practice, Paola, have, going back to the very earliest days of our school and community radio in particular, which has a powerful history in the school that has spread into the community at large, including the development of co-op radio in the city, which continues to be an element of our urban culture. I also want to mark the way that your laying out of the structures of power, in particular, the way in which capitalism is as an extractive force on the body, on the self, and the way in which it produces us in forms that are deeply compromised for our own well-being, is a thread that many of our colleagues continue to work on and respond to and challenge through, as Catherine said, acts of defiance and resistance in the world to shape new worlds. I want to thank Adjoa for her rich and layered response, bringing to bear a number of scholars and thinkers whose work has and continues to be part of the scholarship and the intellectual culture of our school and the worlds that we want to inhabit. I think you've helped us to remember who we are and what it is we want to do to shape a better world, as Catherine has laid out. And so for all those reasons, I thank you very much for your offering, and for Adjoa to your very compelling and rich response and the questions that helped to get us started. I want to note that now that as we bring this part of our evening's events to a close, we're going to open the door and invite you just to head out and to our left, where we have food and drinks and opportunity to carry on conversations with Paola and together. Please come and join us for that. We would love to see you in there to have more informal conversation. Amongst the things that are part of our 50th anniversary celebration include our next talk by Kishana Gray on October 5th, which will be again in this room. I also want to note that over the fall, we will be launching a digital timeline history of the school, which marks some of the threads of activism, scholarship, and engagement in learning that Paola has drawn attention to, that have been and continue to be part of our history. So look for that digital timeline that has been developed and led by Shauna Kay, amongst others. If you'll just give me one moment now, it is my deep honor, and as we come to a close, I want to share some thank yous for people who have been absolutely central in bringing together the 50th anniversary celebration. These events are challenging to bring together. They require a great deal of work and dedication at a time when many of us have so many things on our plate. And so I have much thanks to share with you. If you'll bear with me, I want to thank, to begin with, our organizing committee that includes both faculty, students, and faculty, faculty, students, and staff members within the school. And that includes Zoe Druick, Fred Lesage, Alberto Toscano, Jason Congdon, Catherine Riley, Sarah Ganter, Siwan Yin, Sophia Han, and Victoria Thomas. I also want to extend, and with tremendous, tremendous gratitude, to a friend and a colleague who I called on to help us to pull together our events and our organization. And I'll be absolutely truthful with you, without her dedication and commitment, this program of celebration would not be able to launch and come together. And that's Joanna Ashworth, whose commitment is remarkable. I'm truly grateful to Joanna. I also want to extend thanks to someone I'm getting to know and tremendously enjoying working together, and that is Shauna K. Brown, who's been a force with us in the program. I want to extend thanks to Amy Harris, a doctoral candidate in our program, who's helped us to get things launched off. Also to Andrew Ringer, our new digital content provider, Kara Taves, who helped to get work off the ground, Tessa Perkins-Deneau, Jesse Carson, and two of our fantastic undergraduate students who volunteered to help with tonight's events, Alan, I'm going to say his last name incorrectly, and I knew I would, Alan, and I'm super apologetic to you, but Alan Rupke, and Eden Chipperfield, who I'm grateful to for their contributions. And on that, let us pull ourselves to a close. Please come and enjoy some drink and food with us, and thank you for joining us for this evening.